Hi there. Before we dive into setting up a database and using Perl's Object-Relational Mapping, aka ORM solution called DBIx, let's quickly discuss the concept of ORM and how it can help you to write better code when interacting with databases. If you are already familiar with ORM concept, feel free to jump to the next video where we start by setting up a database and generating files needed for DBIx. First of all, what is Object-Relational Mapping? By definition, ORM is a process that lets you query and manipulate data from database using an object-oriented paradigm. To put it in perspective, you can think of ORM classes as representation of database table structure, attributes as table columns, and instances of classes as database rows. This concept allows developers to interact with databases using objects instead of writing raw queries. Don't worry if all of this sounds confusing. We will look at plenty of examples that will make this clearer. Also, the majority of programming languages have a library that implements a solution that provides an ORM interface. So don't worry if you are thinking that you would need to write one from scratch. As mentioned before, Perl does already have one called DBIx. So what's the benefit of using ORM library instead of writing raw SQL in your code? Well, first of all, one of the biggest benefits is that it abstracts the specifics of query language for whichever storage engine you're using, by allowing you to interact with objects to manipulate the data. If you ever choose to switch between different databases and the ORM supports it, you only need to learn the ORM interface and not the specific database query language. It also helps to follow the dry principle, which basically means do not repeat yourself. So you write and maintain your data model in a single place. So if you ever change database column name or type, you won't need to update every single place where this column is being used. You would only need to update your core data model. It also helps you to abstract common workflows like maintaining your schema versions, migration, and similar. Most ORMs will expose functionality to easily update your data models when there are changes in database structure, so you don't need to manually make changes in various places in your code. It also helps you to make your code less error-prone, meaning you don't need to repeat the same or similar queries all across your codebase. Missing a semicolon or comma by constructing queries by hand is just asking for trouble. ORMs are in place to take that all away. And there are other benefits like making your code more readable and intuitive by delegating the database interactions to ORM interface. Also, most ORMs will sanitize the values by default, so you don't need to worry about SQL injection, which basically means that the end user might run malicious queries against the database by manipulating the form data. And your data model is decoupled from your application code, and it's much easier to make changes across your codebase. However, as with everything in life, there are always downsides, some of these being you will need to learn the syntax of an ORM. The principle of using ORM is transferable between languages, but the interface itself is not. It can also be a bit of a headache to set up an ORM. Another downside is that for queries returning a lot of data, ORMs can be slow. Remember, we need to build instances of models for each row, so in some scenarios using an ORM can cause quite a bit of an overhead. To note here, we will explore solutions in DBIx that we can use to improve the performance, but we will see that this comes at a cost. And finally, if some of your queries are quite complex, you're most likely going to find yourself fighting against the ORM. We will explore how we can write raw SQL under the DBIx hood that will still provide the data models, but more on that later. Now that we know what an ORM is and have explored the benefits and downsides, it's time to put what we discussed in practice. With that said, I'll see you in the next video.